The clock struck midnight when Lila heard the soft whimper of the baby in the crib. Just hours earlier, her boss had publicly humiliated her, dismissing her as just a maid, unaware that she was the only barrier between his child and the danger lurking in the shadows. In a split second, Lila snatched the baby from the crib, shielding him as the front door burst open. The lowlife who had been stalking the family was finally here. "My name is Lila. I will do whatever it takes to protect the innocent, even if it means sacrificing my own safety." As I cradled Sophia against my chest, my heart raced, each beat echoing the urgency of the moment. The front door splintered as the intruder forced his way inside, a shadowy figure whose intentions were far from benign. I glanced at the baby in my arms, her tiny face scrunched up in confusion, blissfully unaware of the danger that loomed just beyond the threshold. My mind raced through options, and I felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. This was not just about protecting myself, it was about shielding the light of this family, the innocent soul that had been thrust into a world fraught with chaos. The intruder's footsteps pounded through the house, reverberating against the walls, each thud a harbinger of the threat that lay ahead. I knew that I had to act quickly. Ducking low, I maneuvered through the hallway, careful to avoid the creaking floorboards that could betray my presence. With every step, my resolve hardened. I could not let fear paralyze me. I had seen too much over the past few months. The way Rachel struggled under the weight of her husband's expectations, the way Thomas seemed more interested in board meetings than his own family. It was up to me, the maid, to keep Sophia safe, to give her a chance at a life filled with love rather than strife. I pressed my back against the cool wall, silently urging my racing heart to settle. My instincts kicked in. I had to get to the basement, where I could hide away until the danger passed. The dimly lit space felt like a sanctuary in contrast to the chaos above. With careful precision, I opened the door, cradling Sophia tightly as I descended the stairs. The air was stale, and I welcomed it, knowing it was an escape from the madness that swirled in the world above. As I reached the bottom step, I could hear muffled voices and the sound of things being knocked over in the living room. My throat tightened at the thought of Thomas, blissfully unaware of what was happening in his own home, trusting the walls to protect him instead of seeing the cracks that were beginning to show. It was a precarious situation, one that was becoming increasingly untenable with each passing moment. I could not shake the image of Thomas's face when he insulted me, thinking I was just a servant. I had devoted my life to this family. And now it felt as though that loyalty was being betrayed by the very people I was trying to protect. Beneath my layers of fear and frustration, a flicker of determination sparked. I would not let this man tear apart the fragile family dynamics that had been built over months of quiet sacrifice. I had seen the tender moments between Rachel and Sophia, how Rachel's eyes would soften when she looked at her daughter, and I couldn't bear to see that joy extinguished. That joy was worth fighting for, and I would do whatever it took to ensure it remained alive. I shuffled deeper into the shadows of the basement, keeping a watchful eye on the door. My fingers brushed against the small stack of cleaning supplies in the corner, and I had a sudden idea. If this intruder was looking for valuables, he would likely head for the master bedroom first. If I could create a diversion, perhaps I could lead him away from where we were hiding. My heart pounded with the notion, but the risk was immense. Still, I had to try. With a quiet resolve, I placed Sophia down on a pile of blankets, ensuring she was warm and safe. Her tiny fingers curled around the fabric, and I felt a surge of love wash over me. I would protect her, even if it meant stepping into the lion's den. I crawled up the basement stairs, pausing at the door and taking a moment to gather my strength. With a deep breath, I pushed it open just enough to slip through, careful not to make any sound that could alert the intruder. The living room was a wreck, furniture upturned and remnants of shattered glass littering the floor. My heart sank at the sight of destruction within a space that should have been filled with laughter and love. But I couldn't dwell on that now. I needed to focus on getting the intruder's attention. I spotted a vase that had survived the chaos, slightly askew on a side table. With a firm grip, I took aim and knocked it over, sending it crashing to the ground with a loud clatter. I ducked back into the shadows as I heard the intruder freeze. "What was that?" he barked, his voice harsh and demanding. I held my breath, listening intently as he stepped cautiously toward the sound. This was my moment. I needed to move quickly. My heart raced as I darted past him, slipping down the hallway toward the front door. I could hear him curse as he realized he had been tricked, and I felt a surge of adrenaline propel me forward. With every ounce of strength, I pushed open the door, my eyes scanning the yard for any sign of safety. I knew I couldn't leave Sophia alone in the basement, but I had to create a diversion long enough for her to be hidden from sight. Just as I stepped outside, I caught sight of a police car turning onto the street, its lights flashing. I waved my arms frantically, shouting for help as the officer approached. "Please, you have to help us," I cried, urgency spilling from my lips. The officer jumped out of the car, his expression shifting from confusion to determination as he rushed toward me. I could only hope it wasn't too late, that I had done enough to protect the precious life I had vowed to safeguard. As the officer approached, I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. "What's going on? Where's the baby?" he asked, his voice laced with urgency. I felt a weight settle in my chest as I fought to keep my composure. "She's in the house," I stammered, pointing toward the imposing structure that loomed behind me. "She needs immediate help, please." The officer nodded, and without another word, he dashed toward the front door, his footsteps echoing in the night. I stood there, heart racing, anxiety gnawing at my insides. I had never anticipated that my role as protector could be put to such a test. As the door swung open, I could only hope that Thomas would remain unaware of the chaos unfolding outside. Inside, I had done my best to create a sanctuary for Sophia, shielding her from the tumult of her parents' lives. But how long could I keep this up? Moments passed like hours as I waited, listening for the sounds of life inside the house. I felt a shiver run down my spine, remembering how Thomas had spoken about me earlier, his words slicing deeper than I dared to admit. I was merely the help in his eyes, a faceless entity that existed to serve his whims. Yet I knew that I was so much more than that, especially to Sophia. The connection I felt with her was indescribable. I was her guardian, fighting fiercely for her well-being. Just then, the officer re-emerged, a look of grave seriousness on his face. "We need to get her to a hospital," he said, urgency bleeding into every word. My heart sank. I had tried so hard to keep everything stable, but the reality was crashing down around me. Without hesitation, I rushed back inside, my feet barely touching the ground as I made my way to the nursery. "Hold on, sweet girl," I whispered, lifting Sophia from her crib. She was so small, her delicate features barely registering under the soft blankets I had wrapped her in. Her small chest heaved with each shallow breath, and I felt a sense of panic welling up within me. I couldn't let anything happen to her. She was the embodiment of hope in a world that felt increasingly dark. The officer carefully guided us outside, and I cradled Sophia close to my heart, feeling the warmth of her tiny body against me. As we reached the patrol car, I glanced back at the house, the place that had seen so much tension and misunderstanding. Thomas was still oblivious, buried in his own world of business pressures, while Rachel struggled under the weight of her own expectations. They had no idea of the storm brewing beneath the surface, nor the lengths I would go to protect their child. The car ride felt surreal, the sirens blaring like a soundtrack to my fears. I watched the lights dance across the pavement, my mind racing with questions. Would they be able to help Sophia? Would Thomas finally see the truth of my devotion? I couldn't help but think of Rachel and how much she must be suffering herself. Her struggles were often overshadowed by Thomas's success, and I longed to reach out to her, to let her know that she wasn't alone in this fight. Finally, we arrived at the hospital. The rush of nurses and doctors enveloped us as they whisked Sophia from my arms, their professionalism a flicker of hope amid my despair. I stood there, helpless, feeling as if I had been stripped of my role as protector. I wanted to scream for them to be careful, to take care of my precious charge. I was terrified of losing her, of failing in my duty. Then, as if sensing my anguish, a nurse turned to me with a reassuring smile. "We'll take good care of her," she promised, and I clung to her words like a lifeline. My heart ached as they wheeled Sophia away, but I knew I had to stay strong. I had fought to keep her safe until this moment, and I wouldn't falter now. While I waited in this sterile hospital environment, the reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave. The weight of my secret, the betrayal I felt, and the love I held for Sophia intertwined into a knot of emotions that nearly overwhelmed me. I was scared of how Thomas would react if he found out the truth, that I had been there for their daughter when they couldn't be. I was terrified of what Rachel would think too, especially if it meant revealing my own feelings of inadequacy in this sprawling family dynamic. I leaned against the wall, the cold surface grounding me. I thought of the times I had seen Rachel struggle with her own battles, caught in a cycle of expectations and responsibilities that weighed her down. I had observed her tear-streaked face hidden behind polite smiles, her internal turmoil so evident, yet so well masked. Maybe, just maybe, she needed someone in her corner too. But how could I approach her without revealing everything? As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I heard the faint echo of footsteps. Turning, I saw Thomas rushing through the door, panic etched across his face. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice rising as he approached me. I met his eyes, searching for understanding. "They took her for treatment," I replied softly, gauging his reaction, hoping he would grasp the gravity of the situation. The tension in the air shifted as realization dawned on him. He began, hesitating as his gaze flickered between me and the direction in which they took Sophia. I braced myself for his reaction, knowing that this moment could change everything. I had been there for his daughter when he had not, and I hoped that, at last, he would see the truth of my unwavering loyalty. As Thomas tried to process the implications of my words, I realized that the path to healing for all of us began with understanding and vulnerability. Maybe this tragedy was the catalyst we needed to confront our fears and misjudgments. I had fought for Sophia. Now it was time to fight for our family, even if that meant facing the uncomfortable truth of our realities. I took a deep breath, preparing to bridge the gap between us, knowing that the next words I spoke would be crucial. "You need to understand, Thomas. She means everything to me." I could see the confusion clouding Thomas's expression, a mixture of disbelief and anger swirling within him. It felt as if a chasm had opened between us, but I pressed on, driven by a fierce sense of responsibility, not just for Sophia, but for him as well. "You don't know what it's like to watch her struggle," I continued, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Every cough, every fever feels like a fracture in my heart. I've dedicated myself to her, and in doing so, I've discovered a depth of love I never knew existed." His eyes softened, and for a moment, the facade of the businessman crumbled. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone shifting from confrontational to curious, as if he were trying to peel back layers of misunderstanding that had built up over the years. I sensed the gears turning in his mind, the realization that perhaps he hadn't been fully present and that he had missed the signs of Rachel's struggles and Sophia's needs. I took a step closer, lowering my voice as if sharing a secret. "Rachel is overwhelmed, Thomas. She wants to be a good mother, but the weight of your expectations and the demands of your career are suffocating her. And Sophia, she needs both of you, but she needs someone to advocate for her right now." A flicker of guilt passed across Thomas's face, and I could see him grappling with the reality he had avoided. I've been so focused on my job and providing for us that I didn't even realize how much Rachel was struggling," he admitted, shame creeping into his voice. "I thought that was enough." "It's not just about providing, Thomas," I urged, feeling the urgency of the moment. "Your presence, your support, your love, they're what will make this family whole. Sophia doesn't just need a father who works hard. She needs a father who will hold her when she cries, a father who will reassure Rachel that she isn't alone in this." As I spoke, I could see the barriers beginning to break down, the layers of disconnection dissolving under the weight of honesty. "I can only do so much," I added softly, feeling the burden of my role as both caretaker and confidant. "I can't fill the void you've left." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration mingled with realization. "I can't believe I've let my work come before my family. I didn't even know you felt this way." I sensed a shift in his demeanor, as if he were awakening from a long stupor. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were never around," I replied, the words slipping out before I could temper them with gentleness. "Your focus has always been on your career, and I didn't want to burden you with more. I didn't want to seem like I was overstepping." His face twisted in thought, and I could see the internal battle raging within him. "What do I do now?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he were admitting to a failure he had long feared. "Start by being present," I urged him. "Talk to Rachel. Let her know you're here to support her, to share this journey as parents together. You can't fix everything overnight, but you can start taking small steps toward rebuilding your family." As the weight of my words settled in the air, I could feel the tension in the room shift. There was still uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. Thomas seemed to be grappling with the idea of change, slowly absorbing the gravity of my plea for his involvement in both Sophia's and Rachel's lives. "I never wanted to be a bad father," he murmured, a hint of vulnerability seeping into his tone. "I thought I was doing what was right." "Sometimes what we think is right blinds us to what is needed," I replied, my heart aching for both him and Rachel. "You have the chance to be more than just a provider. You can be a partner, a protector, a father who shows up." Just then, a soft whimper broke through the tension, a sound that immediately drew our attention. Sophia, stirring in her crib, was waking from her nap. I felt an instinctive rush to her side, my heart quickening as I approached her small form. She was so delicate, so pure, and it pained me to think of the challenges she faced daily. Thomas watched me as I gently picked Sophia up, cradling her with care. The baby's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and I felt a surge of love wash over me. "Look at her, Thomas," I said softly, turning to face him with Sophia in my arms. "She is so innocent and full of potential. She deserves the best of both her parents." For a moment, Thomas stood frozen, his gaze fixed on his daughter. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the realization that he had a choice to make, a choice that could define the kind of father he would be. "You're right," he finally said, voice laced with determination. "I can't let another day pass without doing everything I can for her." I felt a sense of relief wash over me, a flicker of warmth igniting my hope for their family. It was a beginning, a fragile step toward healing, but it was a step nonetheless. As I watched Thomas approach us, reaching out to touch Sophia's little hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps the tide was turning. The road ahead would be challenging, but with the willingness to confront their truths, they could forge a stronger bond built on understanding and love. As I stood there, the warmth of Sophia's tiny hand curled around Thomas's finger brought an unexpected sense of peace. He had spent so much time caught in the whirlwind of his business, and his eyes now held a hint of vulnerability as he gazed at his daughter. I had often witnessed the toll his relentless ambition took on him, but in that moment, it seemed like the weight of the world had lifted just a little. Perhaps he was finally beginning to understand the importance of family over his career. I held my breath, waiting for Rachel to notice this change, to see how the light in Thomas's eyes flickered like a fragile flame that needed nurturing. Rachel stood a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, a wall of uncertainty built around her heart. The pressures of motherhood and her husband's preoccupation with work had left her feeling isolated, and I could sense the storm brewing inside her. I wanted to reach out and reassure her, to tell her that I understood her struggles, but I feared it might only complicate matters. The last thing I wanted was to create further distance between her and Thomas, who had only recently begun to connect with Sophia. I hoped that the sight of her husband bending down to speak softly to their baby would soften the edges of Rachel's heart, but I could see her hesitance. "Leela," Rachel finally spoke, her voice wavering, "do you think she'll be all right?" I turned my gaze to her, the sincerity in her eyes making my heart ache. I had always respected Rachel and wanted nothing more than to see her happy, but the weight of the situation was heavy. "Sophia is a fighter," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within me. "She has you both, and that makes all the difference." Rachel's expression softened slightly, as if she were absorbing my words, but I could see the worry etched on her face. There was so much I wished I could share with her about my bond with Sophia, the countless moments I had spent comforting her during those long nights when the world outside felt cold and unforgiving. But now was not the time for my confessions. It was time for Rachel and Thomas to find their footing as parents. "What if I'm not enough?" Rachel whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. It was a question I had heard many mothers ask themselves. The truth was, she was more than enough. But I knew that sometimes the noise of life drowned out the voices of reassurance. I wanted to tell her that the very act of caring, of showing up day after day, was a testament to her strength. Instead, I took a breath and said, "You both have each other. Together, you'll find a way." Thomas, overhearing our conversation, turned his attention back to Rachel. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, his brow furrowed in determination. I admired his resolve, the way his heart was slowly opening up to the situation. It was as if he was finally seeing the reality behind the glimmering surface of their life, where true happiness resided not in material wealth, but in the laughter and love shared as a family. With a renewed sense of purpose, Thomas reached for Rachel's hand, and I could see the warmth of connection begin to build between them. I hoped they would allow themselves to be vulnerable with one another, to share their fears and hopes, rather than letting the walls of their individual struggles rise between them. I was reminded of how essential communication was in nurturing a family. Without it, misunderstandings could fester and breed resentment, leading them down a dark path. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes in their dynamic. Thomas started spending more time at home, his priorities slowly shifting. He brought flowers for Rachel one evening, a gesture that seemed small yet held monumental significance. I could see the sparkle in her eyes as she accepted his offering. Her smile, a reflection of the warmth that had begun to thaw her heart. It was a reminder that sometimes it took only the smallest acts of love to rekindle a relationship that felt lost in the shadows of responsibility. Meanwhile, I remained vigilant in my role as Sophia's caregiver, fully aware that her health was still delicate and required consistent attention. During those quiet moments when the world outside fell silent, I would sit in the nursery, humming lullabies as Sophia drifted off to sleep. I took solace in the gentle rise and fall of her small chest, the innocence of her slumber, a stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded her family. Each night felt like a sacred promise that I would protect her, ensuring she had the chance to grow and thrive. Despite my dedication, a nagging fear began to creep into my mind. What would happen if Thomas or Rachel discovered the full extent of my care? Would they view me as an intruder in their lives? Someone who had overstepped her boundaries? I had built a bond with Sophia that felt more profound than just a professional obligation, and the thought of losing that connection frightened me. I needed to trust that Thomas and Rachel would come to appreciate the role I had played in keeping their family together.
Yet the thought of confrontation loomed ominously. One evening, while I was preparing for Sophia's bath, I heard raised voices from the living room. I paused, my heart racing as I strained to catch fragments of the conversation. "You're too consumed by work, Thomas. When will you prioritize your family?" Rachel's voice quivered with emotion, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor she often wore. I moved closer, my breath hitching in my throat as I listened. "I'm doing this for us, Rachel. I thought you wanted the best for Sophia." His tone was defensive, and I could sense the tension hanging thick in the air. Their arguments often echoed around the house, a painful reminder of the distance that had grown between them. I wanted to intervene, to offer words of comfort, but part of me knew that this was a moment being needed to confront together. As the night wore on, I felt the weight of my own choices pressing down on me. I needed to find a way to navigate my role in their lives without stepping on fragile toes, to be a support system for Sophia without inadvertently causing discord in the family. Little did I know, this delicate balance would soon be put to the test, pushing us all closer to a reckoning that would either shatter our fragile unity or forge an unbreakable bond of love and loyalty. The tension in the air felt palpable as I moved through the house, the faint cries of Sophia echoing in my ears. Every whimper from the baby pulled at my heartstrings, reminding me of my promise to protect her, to shield her from the turbulence surrounding us. I felt a growing responsibility, as if I were not just a maid, but a guardian of her innocence. The walls of the mansion that had once felt like a sanctuary now loomed over me, heavy with unspoken words and lingering resentments. I knew Rachel was struggling. Her eyes often carried the weight of exhaustion, and I could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed facade. She was drowning in a sea of expectations, torn between the demands of her husband's success and the needs of their child. I wished I could reach out to her, to let her know that I understood her plight, but the chasm of our social roles made it difficult to bridge that gap. I found solace in the quiet moments with Sophia, cradling her in my arms as I hummed soft lullabies, hoping the soothing tones would calm both her and my racing thoughts. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, and in those fleeting seconds, I felt a connection stronger than any words could convey. She was pure, untouched by the world's harsh realities, and I vowed to keep her safe, to be her shield against the tumult that loomed so closely. Yet I could feel the weight of Thomas's dismissive comments haunting me. How could he be so blind to the struggles of his own family? I often caught glimpses of him, rushing through the house with a phone glued to his ear, his mind consumed by business deals that seemed to overshadow the very essence of life that thrived under his roof. He was a man who had achieved much, but seemed to lose sight of the treasure that was right in front of him. One evening, as I prepared Sophia's bottle in the kitchen, I overheard Thomas and Rachel in a heated discussion in the adjacent room. Their words, sharp and biting, sliced through the air like daggers. "You're too focused on your career, Thomas. This isn't just about you." Rachel's voice trembled with frustration. I couldn't help but eavesdrop, my heart racing as I strained to catch every word. "I'm doing this for us," he replied, his tone defensive. But I could sense an undercurrent of denial. "For us? What about Sophia? She needs you here, not at some board meeting." Rachel's voice cracked, revealing the cracks in her composure. I felt a mix of pity and anger towards Thomas. Did he not understand the stakes? Did he not see the toll his absence was taking on both his wife and child? How could I intervene in a way that wouldn't further alienate him from his family? I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, driven by a fierce desire to protect Sophia and a burgeoning resentment toward the man who was so oblivious to the pain surrounding him. That night, I stayed up late, rocking Sophia to sleep, her small breaths a comforting rhythm that calmed my racing thoughts. As I gazed out at the stars twinkling in the sky, I wondered if they, too, felt the weight of the world, far away from the chaos below. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Thomas and Rachel only seemed to grow. I watched them at the dinner table, their conversations stilted and awkward, the warmth of their connection fading like a distant memory. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, each meal a reminder of the love that was once vibrant but now felt like a flickering candle about to be snuffed out. I became increasingly aware of my role in their lives, feeling more like a silent observer than an active participant. My heart ached for both of them, trapped in their own struggles while their daughter needed them both more than ever. One fateful afternoon, the atmosphere shifted. Thomas walked in, his expression clouded with an unusual seriousness. I sensed something had changed, a heaviness that seemed to follow him into the house. As I discreetly wiped down the kitchen counters, I overheard him mumbling to himself, seemingly rehearsing some difficult conversation. My instincts kicked in, urging me to listen, to understand what was happening behind the scenes of their tumultuous lives. It was then that I realized he was finally confronting the truth about his neglect, his eyes reflecting a determination I hadn't seen before. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said, his voice resolute yet tinged with uncertainty. I held my breath, unsure of how this moment would unfold. "I've been blind to everything, to how you're feeling, how Sophia is suffering because of my absence. I need to change." There was a weight to his words, an acknowledgement that seemed to carry years of unresolved tension. I watched as Rachel's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and cautious hope flickering across her face. The air felt electric as they engaged in a conversation that had been long overdue. They spoke openly, the barriers that had once kept them apart beginning to crumble. I knew this was just the beginning, the first step towards healing, but it ignited a flicker of hope within me. Maybe, just maybe, they would find their way back to each other, and in doing so, also find their way back to Sophia. I couldn't help but feel that my quiet dedication had played a part in leading them to this moment. As I quietly moved away, giving them the space to reconnect, I reflected on the power of love, the strength of family bonds, and the importance of communication. As I cradled Sophia in my arms later that night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their journey was far from over, but I would continue to protect this precious child, ensuring that she was surrounded by the love and support she deserved. As the stars twinkled above, I found comfort in the belief that, in time, everything would be all right. After all, every story has its struggles, and it's through those struggles that we often discover the true meaning of family. If you've experienced something similar, I invite you to share your own stories of love and resilience. Your words could inspire others to find hope in their own journeys. As I cradled Sophia in my arms, the soft rhythm of her breathing calmed the storm brewing in my heart. I could hear the muffled sounds of Thomas and Rachel arguing in the other room, their voices rising and falling like a tide threatening to pull everything under. It pained me to know that their struggles were overshadowing the joy that a new life should bring. With every word exchanged between them, I felt the weight of my own role in this delicate web of family dynamics. Despite the bitterness of Thomas's earlier words, I remained steadfast in my commitment to protect their daughter, the tiny girl who relied on me for more than just care. She depended on me for hope. In the fragile moments between their heated exchanges, I caught glimpses of Rachel, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. I could see how the pressures of being the perfect mother and wife were suffocating her. There was a time when laughter echoed through the halls of this grand house, but now it was replaced by tension and unspoken fears. I wished I could ease her burden, to let her know that I was not just a maid, but a confidant and ally. I wanted to reassure her that together we could nurture Sophia and create a sanctuary within these walls, one where love triumphed over despair. One evening, after another long day, I sat by the window with Sophia sleeping peacefully on my chest, the moonlight casting a gentle glow over us. I found myself thinking about the future, the kind of world I envisioned for her. I dreamt of the day when she would run through the fields, her laughter blending with the wind, and I would be there, cheering her on. But first, I needed to confront the shadows looming over us.
My heart sank as I realized that Thomas's ignorance about the strain his absence placed on Rachel was contributing to this family's unraveling. He saw only what he wanted to see, the success of his business, and failed to recognize the fragile state of his home life. Determined to break the cycle of misunderstanding, I planned a small intervention. I decided to speak with Rachel when I had a moment alone with her. It was during one of those rare, quiet afternoons when Thomas was immersed in meetings. I found Rachel in the nursery, her hands gently stroking Sophia's hair as she hummed a lullaby. The sight struck me with a wave of compassion. I could see the love she poured into every moment spent with her child, yet the shadows under her eyes told a different story. "Rachel," I said softly, stepping into the room, careful not to disrupt the fragile peace. She looked up, startled, as if she had been lost in her thoughts. "Can we talk for a moment?" She nodded, her gaze returning to Sophia, who stirred slightly at the sound of our voices. "Of course, Leela. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, weighing my words. "I know things have been tough lately. Thomas is under a lot of pressure at work, and I can see how much that affects you." I took a breath, my heart racing. "But I think we both know that Sophia needs both of you right now. She needs a united front, not just a mother who is overwhelmed or a father who is detached." Rachel looked at me, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and sadness. "I appreciate you saying that," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to reach him anymore. He's so focused on his career that I feel like I'm fighting this battle alone." I stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone. I'm here, and I care deeply for Sophia and for you. Maybe if you could talk to Thomas about how you're feeling, he might realize what's at stake." A flicker of determination sparked in her eyes, but it was soon replaced by doubt. "What if he dismisses me? What if he doesn't understand how serious this is?" "Then I'll be here, supporting you both. You deserve to be heard, Rachel, and Sophia deserves a family that understands the strength and vulnerability." As I spoke, I could feel the heaviness of my own sacrifices pressing against my chest. I had silently witnessed the unraveling of their lives, but I had also watched as moments of tenderness shone through the cracks. Perhaps it was time for me to summon the courage to confront Thomas, to break the silence that hung in the air like a dark cloud. With newfound resolve, I decided that I would speak to him directly, not just about his responsibilities at work, but about the importance of being present for his family. I had a plan, and it filled me with a sense of purpose. That evening, while the sun dipped below the horizon, I found Thomas in his study, poring over documents that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Thomas," I said, my voice steady despite the anxiety that churned in my stomach. He looked up, surprise flashing across his features. "Can we talk for a moment?" He gestured for me to sit, his brow furrowing slightly. "Is something wrong, Leela?" The vulnerability in my chest constricted as I began to speak, but I knew I could not hold back. "It's about Rachel and Sophia. I think it's vital you realize how much they need you right now." The look on his face shifted from confusion to concern as I poured out my thoughts, revealing the struggles I had witnessed in their home. I spoke of Rachel's isolation, her fears, and the unyielding love she had for their daughter. The words flowed freely, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, my efforts would lead to a change in the atmosphere surrounding us. As I spoke, I could see a flicker of realization crossing his face, and I knew that I was no longer just a maid in his eyes. I was someone who cared deeply for the family that he had overlooked in the pursuit of his ambitions. I wanted him to understand that wealth meant nothing if it came at the expense of love and connection. I hoped that by the end of our conversation, he would find a way to bridge the chasm that had formed in their lives. And in doing so, he might restore the balance that was so desperately needed for all of us.